Good morning and welcome to Market Outsiders. It's Tuesday, August 5th. It's around 9:30 on the East Coast. My name is Namaan, joined by my co-host and colleague Jenny Ray. And Jenny Ray, I promise we talk about more than just fast food on this podcast, but today's another fast food day, isn't it?
Today is a fast food day. We should talk about slow food someday, come on. But it somehow never seems to make the Wall Street Journal and Reuters and others. So maybe we'll find an article at some point to talk about with that. But yeah, I think we should talk a little bit about Yum Brands today. Earnings came out, and I think that they reinforce the importance of pulling portfolios apart. And that's really our goal today is understanding not what's happening macroeconomically, not what's happening at a portfolio level, but actually what's happening at a brand or even a kind of restaurant type level. And we've talked a little bit about this with McDonald's and Chipotle and some of the other brands that we've looked at. And I think that this one is just a really interesting example of that. I actually think you could do the same thing if you were looking at a business that sold, building products for governments, right? Because not all building products at all times are going to be growing in the same way. So it's really the exercise that I think will be interesting to go through today. So let's take a look at this headline that I found this morning. Taco Bell parent Yum Brands misses estimates as spending slows and costs rise. So, Naman, I don't know if everybody on this call knows what Yum Brands owns. Do you feel like that's general knowledge, or should it be? If I were running you through a case or having a conversation, would it be expected that somebody would know what Yum Brands is?
I'd expect someone I was running through a case interview to know Yum Brands, but I will say I was raised in Kentucky and Yum Brands is headquartered in Louisville, so I might have an unfair advantage. But I'd expect your typical candidate to know that Yum Brands owns KFC, Taco Bell, Pizza Hut, right? Like that's kind of the bulk of the portfolio. They own more than that, but I'd expect you to know at least those three elements of the portfolio. And if you don't, great, you know now.
So let's talk a little bit about this, right? When I read this article this morning, and like this could be the same thing that somebody else would read with the headline: Taco Bell parent Yum Brands misses estimates as spending slows and costs rise. I was like, now this is dire economic data, right? Because we've talked a little bit about how Taco Bell is a pretty traditional outperformer in the fast food space. And so it's kind of one of those things where it's like, look, if Lowe's is down, but Home Depot is up. That's not a macroeconomic issue. That's an execution or a customer base issue. This is one of those things that's kind of like, oh, if Taco Bell is down, like that might actually be a macroeconomic issue. So I found this interesting, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to probe into it this morning. I don't know if you read the same thing. That's actually not what this headline exactly says, but just what that was kind of my first take on it. So I thought we might just go through spending slows, cost rise. I don't know what their estimates were because I haven't been following Yum Brands on a quarter by quarter, week by week basis. But they missed analyst estimates for second quarter comp sales and profit on Tuesday. So a lot of the measurements for restaurants are same store sales, right? That's one of the most important things that if you're looking at restaurants, you have to understand because it's not fair to inflate restaurant growth by the number of stores that they have open, although Starbucks kind of is focusing on doing that a little bit. But second core comparable sales and profit hit by higher ingredient costs and muted demand that weighed on its businesses, including Taco Bell, sending its shares down about 2% before the bell. So that was pretty interesting to me. And then right, fast food chains, including they looked at kind of the peer set, launching budget-friendly meal deals to boost foot traffic. But then this year, right, Taco Bell, which accounts for 38% of the company's total revenue, rolled out meal boxes ranging from $5 to $9. Still, its same store sales growth in the US, the biggest market, slowed to 4% during the second quarter from 5% a year earlier. So, this is one of those traditional things that we've often seen, right? It's not negative. You don't see a same store sale loss. You have a lost foot traffic, but they grew at 5% per quarter last year, and this year only 4%. So I thought that was kind of one of the most important headline takeaways. And then, Naman, are you good for me to keep going, or do you want to weigh in on that before I do?
No, keep going. This is my first look
Okay,
at the earnings of Yum Brands, so I'm gonna
great.
react to this in real time.
Great. So, right, consumers haven't stopped dining out, but they've become more selective, chasing value-driven experiences that deliver more bang for their buck. You know, that to me sounds like a soundbite. We don't actually know that. We don't know that that's what consumers are looking for. We don't know if the same consumers are coming to your stores, if different consumers are coming to your stores, or if those meal deals, even just on the menu, have led to lower total ticket values, right? So we don't know if somebody was spending $20 now and is now spending 18, and that's what drove this drop in the same store sales growth. But there is still a growth in same store sales. So there's a lot of data underneath here that you would really need to look at. Who are these customers? How frequently are you frequent customers coming back? What are they buying? You can't just change a menu item and make this kind of soundbite analysis based on that. They talked a little bit about Chipotle cutting its annual gross sales forecast. McDonald's warned of tough conditions in May. They're talking a lot about tariffs. Namaan, can you just spitball? How would tariffs affect the restaurant industry? And immediately, it's not one of those industries that you think of like furniture or something that would kind of show up in a Target that would be affected by tariffs. But what could affect the restaurant industry based on tariff plays?
Oh, and my first instinct is just kind of your ingredients that you would use inside the restaurant. So like for example, if a lot of your menu has like an avocado component to it, 98% of our avocados come from Mexico. So if there are kind of specialty ingredients, a lot of tomatoes are imported into the United States. And so, even at Pizza Hut, the tomatoes that you'd use for the sauce, for example, could be driving higher costs if those are now subject to tariffs. And so I would think kind of the first order effect of tariffs would be higher input costs. And then kind of second and third order effects would be if everything is getting more expensive for people, well, then maybe they're going to pull back on spending in certain areas. But the ingredients is where my mind goes first.
I love it. So here, I think is also important, right? Just a great example of something that we've talked about pretty frequently here in the pod. Yum's worldwide same-store sales rose 2% during the quarter, while analysts estimated a 2.37% increase. So they didn't go negative; they just missed estimates, which is one of the reasons why that was one of the concerns here, right? Excluding items, it earned 1.44 per share, missing the estimate of 1.46 per share owing to increased advertising and promotional expenses, as well as still high input costs. But again, they missed, but they're still pretty close. And again, the focus is not actually on decreasing revenues; it's on slowing increases of revenues. And a lot of people conflate those two concepts in a way that is unhelpful when you're thinking about what you would want to do or how dire a situation is or how immediate a response would need to be inside a business.
I'll just
Total
say,
costs and
January,
expenses
really
during the
quickly.
quarter, though, up 13%. I think that's pretty insightful. And that's what I would want to probe into a little bit more. Go
Let me
ahead,
just say
Naman.
really quickly, the missing estimates only matters for the stock price. It doesn't really matter for the business performance. So your stock is priced at a certain level because of the estimates. So if you miss estimates, usually, right, you see a decline in your share price the next day. So it matters for investors, but if we're looking at like the core operations of a business, we don't really care about that as much. So what we're doing today is we're not really looking at this from an investing point of view. We're looking at this from an operational point of view. And so that's why this total costs and expenses being up by 13% in one quarter is more interesting to us than missing earnings per share by 2 cents.
I also just think this is interesting here. I kind of glossed over this a little bit, but like the Trump administration's unpredictable trade policies have made it harder for businesses to plan operations. I don't know that that's necessarily entirely true. I think that businesses plan operations in light of whatever the policies are, whether they're consistent or not, for a worst case scenario planning opportunity or for a best case scenario planning opportunity. So all of this is saying is that the analyst estimates are hard to predict, but from a business planning perspective, not a lot changes based on what's happening inside the administration's policies because you're going to plan for what you think is going to drive the most effective performance inside the business. So there was, I think there's often again like conflation instead of correlation when it comes to those kinds of issues across the board.
I thought that article was pretty skinny, to be honest with you. No pun intended, as we're talking about Taco Bell and KFC. But what I would want to know is the portfolio breakdown. So if if growth is slowing, which it is, okay, what's the driver of the growth slowing? And the first thing I want to look at is like where in the portfolio is that happening? So it sounds like from that article, it's not coming from Taco Bell. So it's coming from Pizza Hut and KFC. And I don't know if you looked at earnings and if you can verify that, but that would be my first instinct.
Yeah. So I'm gonna go. There's actually, I think, another article, Damon, that was on Reuters, but just in for the interest, I think like what if you were looking that up? I would want to actually look it up on a different site. Let's go see if we can find another place where potentially this could be pulled out because that to me is the key insight here. It's because Yum Brands could totally be just masking what's happening at each of the micro brands. So let's look at CNBC, often kind of a pretty easy, digestible place. Let's see if they've got some
There
tear
you
outs
go.
here. There we go, right? So Pizza Hut and KFC reported US same-store sales declines. Notably, not in there was Taco Bell. Taco Bell, the Jewel reported same-store sales growth. So we saw that it was supposed to be 5, it was actually 4. But this to me is kind of like, okay, um, same store sales declines again is more of a material business issue than missing an estimate that was either based on your guidance or based on what they had consensus on. We kind of looked at this earnings per share 1.44, revenue down just by a hair. Second quarter net income is actually up year over year. So also like that's insightful. That's one of my North Stars for looking at businesses. Net sales climbed 10% to 1.93 billion. Digital transactions pretty strong. So there are a lot of like really interesting kind of key pieces. But this, I think is where we're talking about, right? You got to get down to this place to start looking at the brand level or the portfolio pieces. So KFC reported same-store sales growth of 2%. The fried chicken chain has China as its biggest market, but its US same-store sales slid 5%. That to me is the hallmark of a really challenging moment for brand. In fact, they're now number 5. Raising Cane's and Wingstop sell more chicken than
I'm
KFC.
glad you mentioned that because when we were walking through the Reuters article, kind of what I was thinking is I think this is like a competitive landscape story. So, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to ask you about Pizza Hut and KFC, because when I look at the fast food landscape, I see more natural competitors for Pizza Hut and KFC than I do for Taco Bell. You know, like when you look at
Del
the
Taco, it
category,
doesn't count. Yeah.
I mean, Del Taco may be in like certain regions of the country, right? But with KFC, you do have like everybody and their mother now has like a chicken sandwich or chicken offering on the menu on top of competitors like Zaxby's and Raising Cane's and Wingstop that only do chicken. When you look at Pizza Hut, like there's a lot of competition in that space from your Domino's and your Papa John's and your Little Caesars and like your like million mom and pop pizza shops that are out there. But when I look at the competitive landscape for Taco Bell, the only player I could think of was Del Taco. And that's it. And they're not even everywhere in the country. And you kind of just have these like maybe regional chains, I'd say
Mhm.
mostly in the Southwest and on the West Coast that they're
Yeah.
competing with. But if you want kind of fast food, quote unquote Mexican, like we all know it's not real Mexican, but if you want that kind of food at that price point, where else do you go if not Taco Bell? And so I think this is like a big competitive landscape story. And so I'm glad that they're mentioning market share here because I think that is the biggest pressure that KFC and Pizza Hut are facing. It's maybe like an operational misstep here that caused some of this, but a lot of it's just increasing competition and a failure to respond, just in terms of value proposition, brand proposition, etc.
So I don't go to KFC very often. We actually have a family tradition that every summer when we do our opening boat ride on Shasta Lake, we go to KFC and we bring family style KFC onto the boat, and it's just like our moment for KFC. But when I think about KFC, I would think about I don't actually know what number 1 and number 2 are, but I have to think that Chick-fil-A and Popeyes are on that list as well. So when I think about it, like the family style what kind of value proposition is, I think, part of the challenge. And interestingly, in pizza, it's a little bit the same, right? So the stores that you see increasing are those where a worker who is headed to a job in their car can grab a solo item. You can't do that at a Pizza Hut, not only because it's a largely in-store thing, but there are very few single serve offerings. And you have a complete revolution inside the chicken business around the chicken sandwich that has really enabled you to do that much more effectively. So for KFC, uh, anyhow, it would be interesting to take a deeper dive on the menu and the breakdown of what people are actually buying at KFC, because you could think of the family style model as being a great way to drive up your individual ticket items, everybody walking out the store with a higher total value, but it's probably also much slower. And it's also probably, I can only imagine there's just lower demand in that category as well. So anyhow, they have new leadership. Catherine Tan Gillespie took over as president in April. That would be a really interesting conversation to have and to kind of probe into what some of the plans are to remake maybe the menu or the store experience. But my experience with KFC is it's generally pretty slow. It's also only something that I think about on the family style version. I never think like, hey, I could just run to KFC and grab a sandwich and a
Mm.
side.
That's interesting. So I've not eaten at KFC in years, but I do know that they have been going after that, what we'll call like single consumer type of transaction. Like they have a chicken sandwich. They have I've seen commercials for their famous bowls. I think they're like $5, right? And it's like mashed potatoes and chicken nuggets and a whole bunch of stuff in one bowl that you could kind of grab and go. So they have those, but it's interesting because I never think about that as an option. And it sounds like you don't either. So obviously it's not breaking through, at least for us, in terms of the messaging around who KFC is for.
That's right. I also would suspect that kind of like the Starbucks problem that we've talked about operationally, if you have a mix of people that are going through a drive-through and I'm getting a bucket with four sides, that takes much longer to put together and process than an order that just has these kind of single service items. And so I would imagine that even if I go to do it, I don't think of KFC as a fast option. So even if I think of it as a solo option, it doesn't feel like that kind of option. So anyhow, we could be totally wrong. We could be the wrong people to talk to about KFC. But there are operational ties that I would make between other businesses that we've looked at and what is happening at KFC. Pizza Hut. When's the last time you ate at a Pizza Hut, Naman?
Oh, honestly, I cannot remember.
What so Pizza Hut has like you said, a lot of in-store category competition. What I think has been very interesting is the rise of places like Mod Pizza or Blaze Pizza that are kind of this like fast, do it yourself, often solo serving or at least like personalized processes in the kind of under $20 pizza category. But Domino's, which is operated by one of my former colleagues at Bain, is just to me just absolutely eating Pizza Hut's dinner as far as I'm concerned. And you think of Pizza Hut, their same store sales fell 1%, hurt by weaker demand in the US market, right? US same store sales fall 5% during the quarter. I mean, to me, I'm just honestly surprised that Pizza Hut sometimes is still open. And I don't know who their customers are or what they're doing, but Domino's has essentially shifted to an entirely takeout and delivery model. And I can't imagine that there is enough demand for in-store dining at the Pizza Hut locations. And it just doesn't feel like they've entirely made that shift. But Domino's has gone to very, very simplistic pricing that's incredibly easy to access, right? A two-topping pizza for $6.99, at least in California. In Texas, it's probably $5.99. But right, you have to buy two or more. They have like five things on a core menu, one or two sweets, one or two appetizers, and then one or two pizzas, all at the same price point. And their goal is just to get you to bundle up. Like really, really efficient operations because of that, because they have simplified the menu to down to a really basic level. I just haven't seen Pizza Hut make any of those changes, and certainly that's one of I feel like Pizza Hut. I should be one of their target customers. I've got young kids and a middle schooler that are in sports and in schools. Like these should be places that I would go. I haven't seen them on the radar. So I'm not surprised by these pieces of the news, but this is not saying that Taco Bell is in trouble. I just want to really re-highlight that, right? The headline initially was like Taco Bell parent, Yum Brands misses earnings. Well, you look at it and Taco Bell is only, right, I think it said early, it's the largest piece of the portfolio, but it's still only 38%. It was up here, I think.
It's
Um,
38% of its revenue, I believe.
38% of revenue. And so like it's not even it's not even the majority of the revenue. So it still could be largest, but
Mhm.
there are other pieces that are kind of pulling
And there are
forward.
other pieces of the portfolio beyond just these three. Like I am, don't quote me on this, but I believe that they own like one of the big like kind of like coffee chains. And there's other like elements of Yum brands beyond just these three. But when you think about Yum, you should think about Taco Bell, KFC, Pizza Hut first. Like they're the core of the portfolio. The other thing that's interesting to me is they mentioned here at the bottom just the Taco Bell's chicken sales. There's a
Yeah.
there's a potential that Taco Bell's cannibalizing KFC a little bit. And if I'm Yum Brands, I'm not mad about it, right? Because I'm thinking if KFC is losing share in the chicken market, okay, great. Well, like as a macro entity, how can we ensure that we are like still maintaining share in that particular segment? Well, if KFC's failing, let's just make sure that we're having people shift their chicken spend over to Taco Bell. And so, and with the brand, with like the younger customer base, like there's a potential for us to, maybe even like extract higher margins from like, I don't know, like four nuggets for $5 at Taco Bell than we are from like a whole meal deal at KFC for $10. And so I just think it's interesting. I'm sure they're thinking about it at like the macro portfolio level, some of that cannibalization, but I just at first instinct, I don't think that they're necessarily concerned about it. I just think it's interesting that you see kind of KFC's position in the chicken market slipping while chicken sales at Taco Bell have climbed 50% in the last 2 years, and they're both owned by the same parent company.
I just want to kind of conclude by the way, I do think that's super interesting. They also, this is kind of what I was getting at before, right? Most people are reporting negative quarters. We haven't even had a negative week for Taco Bell. I mean, that's the soundbite that's powerful, right? Because they're basically saying like there isn't anything that is going negative. We simply just missed on what your expectations were. And that's an important kind of hallmark of what I was saying earlier, which is that like Taco Bell is not failing. The macro economy is not in dire peril because you see what's happening at Taco Bell. In fact, what we're seeing here is this intercategory competition, and I think that's really powerful. I was just going to conclude by saying if I were at Bain, I could think of a couple of things that Yum would hire us to do. And I think that it's helpful just to maybe conclude with thinking about this. Number one, to ask the fundamental question of whether Yum should be Yum. Like what value is this group of brands getting from operating multiple organizations? They're adding cost for sure, by having a person who is in charge of all of the portfolios. I don't know what benefits they're getting. This is one of those things that might have looked great on paper, but it's kind of failing the litmus test of rationality right now. Are they actually negotiating for cost inputs across the
They
portfolios
they
together?
should be.
Right? Are they actually like purchasing their packaging, which is one thing that we didn't talk as much about earlier, from from the same places? Are their supply chains intertwined or separate? Are they marketing using the same kind of folks? Because I would estimate that this might be one of those situations where you actually have simply duplicate costs instead of advantages from operating multiple brands, especially in light of the fact that their consumer targets are quite different and their operating models are also different. In fact, I don't know if Pizza Hut is franchise based. Like, I don't even know if they have franchise versus store owned across the
Mm.
portfolio that's standardized, which would be huge, major differences. And so I'm not sure if that fundamental question of like whether Yum should stay Yum or whether Taco Bell should spin off as its own traded brand is kind of one of those pieces. The second thing that they would hire us to do, which we might have estimated based on the way the conversation was going to go in the beginning, is just do a portfolio look for each one of these organizations. And we probably would start with the underperformers, right? So it wouldn't be, hey, how could Taco Bell go from 4 to 5% growth? It's kind of like Taco Bell's on the right trajectory. The operators are strong. They're meeting demand. Their testing is clearly working. Let's try to revive some of these underperforming brands. And so I've done projects just like that when I was at Bain, and that's the kind of thing that they would hire us to do right now. When you have same store sales declines in the core US market, that's going to be one of the most important things as well. Any final thoughts, Naman, before we sign off?
No, I think I'll just say this seems like a US specific problem for some of these brands because we looked earlier, KFC actually saw growth. Like KFC International saw growth. It's just the fact that,
In China in particular.
yeah, that's their biggest market. It's the US same store sales decline that's dragging down the entire business performance. So the entirety of KFC's growth is coming outside of the US. They opened over 870 stores last quarter around the world. So like there is like a growth trajectory that's in place at KFC. And so a part of what we haven't talked about yet, we've talked about, category versus category competition. We haven't talked about geographical differences. And like, are there learnings that KFC can extract from its international operations and bring them over to the US? I know for me, like I've
By
traveled,
the way, PS, the 871 is across the whole portfolio.
oh,
KFC was the
across the whole
driver, but it
was a
wasn't
driver.
KFC's only. Yeah, yeah, just to make
Okay.
sure that that's clear.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, that's helpful. But when I've been around the world and I've stopped in, like I've stopped in at a KFC in China. And one of the things that I've noticed is that actually the quality and the taste of the food is better. Like I'd much rather go to KFC in China than I would here.
Oh,
Right? Like
interesting.
the menu's different. Right? Like there's a sandwich called the Zinger, right? Like it's available in China. I've had it in Pakistan, right? I'm like, great, like why isn't this here? Like this is great,
Mm.
right? Like so there's different menu offerings. Food's cheaper, that makes sense, but it also tastes better than what I've experienced in the US. And so I'm not exactly sure what's different between like KFC International and KFC US, but I'd be interested in digging further just to see are there learnings we can bring from our international growth back to the US? It's a different market, but maybe there's more similarities between consumers than they expect.
Honestly, in Southern California, we already talked about Din Tai Fung. It's using the driver of like growing Asian populations inside the U.S. and also like big share of wallet inside those spaces. Like I would see a revival of KFC potentially coming from an Asian-led menu, right?
Mhm.
So thinking about actually not just like a US based store and a Chinese based store, but like what would a Chinese themed US store look like?
Look
Because I think
like.
there could be some
Mhm.
major opportunities inside that category. I'm not the CEO of KFC and I'm not raising my hand for the job, but there are, like you said, Naman, some interesting learnings that sometimes like if you get mired in the data, you forget about. Those are things that consulting firms often will help people break out of. They'll kind of take a fresh look and a fresh perspective on what that exactly would be. So I love that idea though. Like what if some of the menu items from China, which a lot of people who are cross-continental might have experienced, showed up inside the US? How would that
What
potentially
if there is like a
revitalize them?
Chinese style KFC like in a Chinatown, right? As a pilot, right? And
Hmm.
I think a big part of I think Japanese culture is fried chicken on Christmas, right? So like there are like sub consumer segments that you could try to tap into to revitalize some of this growth, and it might actually, mean that you go a little bit more niche to tap into some of that growth.
I actually have two fun anecdotes to close. One is that I had some friends that went to Japan last year and they were about 2 weeks too late in mid December and ordering their KFC for Christmas. And so they had to go to like a regular restaurant and have a standard Christmas dinner. They were super disappointed because that was one of the things they were looking for being there over Christmas. Also, kind of a fun fact in South Africa, where my husband is from, fried chicken is called Kentucky. Like you go to get Kentucky, kind of like Kleenex is a tissue. Fried chicken is Kentucky, and so when you're like walking into any store, they actually even if it's not a KFC, KFC is actually a pretty big brand there. But even if it's not a KFC, you call fried chicken Kentucky somewhere else. So just a couple of fun facts from the international markets that I do think could be really fun learnings for KFC. I think this brand is not dead. I think that there's some like a huge amount of power there and opportunity, and I'd love to see it kind of remake itself. And that would be a fun story to track. So if we see some moves like that, Naman, we'll probably have to, go to KFC to do some firsthand research, just like I went to Din Tai Fung. But here's this is the hard part of our job. Are you willing to do it? That's what I want to
I mean, for KFC, that's a tough ask, honestly. So,
know.
which might be part of their problem. But I guess
That's exactly right. You don't even want to go do market research at a restaurant? Like, that's wild. Well, thanks for the
well,
great conversation, Naman. Really enjoyed it today. I hope that y'all kind of got your wheels turning, thinking about some of the business implications of, first of all, earnings misses, second of all, portfolios, and third of all, just the restaurant industry and what it means for the macro economy right now. We're looking forward to being back with you later this week. Thanks for joining.